Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, today we have yet another lecture on Indian history. Having discussed the ancient Indian economy, today we will discuss about the medieval Indian economy during 8th to 12th century AD. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio Dr. Bipul Singh. He is a reader in history at Motilal Nehru College, University of Delhi, and where he has specialized in teaching medieval Indian history and environment. He holds a PhD in history from the University of Delhi. He has been a part of many national and international conferences, and being the prolific writer that he is, has to his credit a number of books, research papers, and books reviews. Besides his academic interest in history, Dr. Singh is also an active environmental activist who stresses on a more pragmatic approach to solving problems currently being faced worldwide. His views in the matter have been published in various national dailies. And recently, Dr. Singh has also written a book interpreting medieval India, which stress on the different aspects of the medieval India. That also stress on that the medieval India was not only limited to Delhi Sultanate, but it was also apart from this and extended in different part of the country. So I hope his knowledge and experience will help us to understand the medieval Indian economy in a new perspective. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Singh for the EduSet lecture on the very topic. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, students and friends. In the last and earlier lectures, you've heard a lot about the ancient Indian economy. And then probably in the last lecture, you were also introduced to the system of land grants that started in the Satvahana period and that became a little more prolific in the Gupta period. But today we are going to discuss a little later period, that is the period between 8th to the 12th century AD. And on the given map you can see this is the map of India roughly for this period, which has three major dynasties as you see there: the Gurjara Pratiharas, the Rashtrakutas, the Palas, and down south there you have the Cholas. But these are conventionally the major dynasties of the period. But apart from these dynasties, there were many other in existence in India, and we do not have much knowledge of those dynasties, largely because of the fact that we do not have much evidences and records available for them. So whatever records and evidences that we get and that we have been getting over the years is largely confined to all these major dynasties. And that is the reason why our history has largely been remained confined to these dynasties and the emergence and decline of these dynasties. So we were talking about those land grant. Let me first tell you what these land grants are and how these actually function during this period that we are going to discuss. In the post-Gupta period, the system of land grants became very, very much, frequent. And the kings of the time started giving these land grants to many samantas. Now, as a result of that, you hear of many titles like the Mahasamantas, the Ranas, the Rauts, and many similar titles for this period. In various inscriptional records, you will hear of these kind of titles and such kind of grants being given. But the difference that you find between the earlier grants, that is the grants given during the Gupta and the Satvahana period, and what you find during the early medieval period, is that during this period the grants are more of a secular kind. The earlier grants were largely religious grants. There were grants given to the Brahmanas, but now the grants are being given more frequently to the non-Brahmins as well. So, the system became so frequent that people started believing that this is a period of feudalism. That is, these grantees emerged on the scene as feudal lords. As a result of this kind of a perception and the evidences that we get, the whole historiography of the early medieval period revolved around such concepts. Then, in fact, historians interpreted this period on this basis only. But before such inscriptional records started coming in, the historians of the pre-independence period treated this period as a dark phase. They believe that since this period does not have much inscriptional record, it does not have much records available for writing history, so it's a dark phase. And it also indicated that probably there was nothing much happening in this period. So historians basically call this phase as a stagnant phase. There was nothing new happening, and that is why many historians call it as more of a traditional kind of period, and it was in fact considered to be a continuation of the earlier period. Let us first start with what Marx, one of the great historians, interpretation on this medieval Indian history is. Let us try to understand that, and we'll find out that Marx in fact called this period and the whole history of this early medieval period as static, and he called it as orientally despotic and traditional kind of a state. But this was an interpretation which also meant that the state and the society and the economy of the period is static and it is changeless, so thereby there was no change taking place in the Indian scenario. As you can see in this graph here, in this figure, there are two major models that have developed in the Indian historiography related to this period, and we normally divide this into two segments called the changeless and the change models. But within this change model, we have this major model called the Indian feudalism model, and then other one called the integrative polity model. We were talking about the Marx concept and his Asiatic mode of production concept. In fact, by this he meant that there was an absolute power in the hands of the orientally despotic rulers, and through his explanation of the Asiatic mode of production, Marx excluded India from the orthodox mode of production of slaves and the feudal societies. Now, before this, I must tell you that when Marx was explaining the history of human evolution, he divided the history into various modes of production, and then he believed that the Indian history does not fit into that traditional mode of production. So he called this Indian history part as the Asiatic mode of production type. But then the Indian Marxist historians themselves did not like that concept of about India, and they believe that this concept is largely meaning that there is no change taking place in the Indian system, whereas there is certainly evidences of changes taking place. So then we moved on to the change hypothesis model, and historians started tracing the history of this period into a kind of changed system, and they all started with a centralized state model. So they said that the Indian history during this period was a kind of a centralized state. But then when the historians of such belief treated this history as centralized state, it also in a way meant that there was nothing much changing, because in the earlier period also there was some kind of a centralized state in existence. Then came the another model, and that was led by Professor D.D. Kaushambi, and he came for the first time came with the idea of a feudalism model in the early medieval period, and then that was later on supported by Professor R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, B.N.S. Yadav, and various other historians. Kaushambi's hypothesis was largely divided and into two parts, and in fact he discussed this his concept of feudalism into two segments, that is feudalism from above and feudalism from below. By feudalism from above, he meant that there was a state in existence wherein the king levied tribute from the subordinates, and the ruler ruled in its own right, and then the king also ruled at that time. But then both of them, despite the existence of these tributary or subordinate rulers, the power of the king was not curtailed as such. And in fact, these subordinate rulers ruled in their own territory, and they did whatever they liked. So Kaushambi in fact tries to explain this in this feudalism from above, that feudalism was in existence, but it was at the upper level. Then he talks about the next concept called the feudalism from below, and by this he meant that a class of landowners developed between the state and the peasantry within the village to wield armed power over the local population, and in this the taxes were collected by the small intermediaries. Then Professor R.S. Sharma continued with this. He further continued this idea of feudalism in the Indian context, and he named it as the Indian feudalism model. So his theoretical construct for this early medieval period is now famous as the Indian feudalism model, and he argued that during this period, that is 8th to the 12th century, there were a number of changes taking place in the Indian society, and so he did talk about the changes occurring in the Indian state and economy. But then these changes were of such types which were not in existence earlier, and whatever was changing was of a new kind, of a new type. So even if he talks about the trade, if he talks about the urbanization, that is in the terms of decline and not in terms of emergence. So what he actually means is that earlier on there were trade in existence, there were proliferation of trade, there were proliferation of urban centers, but this period saw the decline of such economic systems. When he describes this period of Indian feudalism, he lists few features for the period, and one of the features we have discussed earlier was that this period was full of land grants given to the Brahmins and many non-Brahmins as well. These grants which were given to the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins, they later on became traditional landholders, and they became hereditary also, and gradually they assumed many of the functions of the government. They not only got the power to collect revenue, but they also had the administrative power, like the rights of awarding punishment and exacting fines to the people of their area, and they also assumed the right to sublet their lands. So in fact, R.S. Sharma indicates towards not only feudalism, but in fact sub-infeudation taking place. That is, the feudal lords also starting subletting their own area of land, and then such kind of sub-feudal lords also emerged on the scene. Then he suggests that because of such kind of land grants, the villages became self-sufficient. The trade declined, the urban centers declined, the craftsmen living in the urban areas, they moved towards the rural areas, and as a result, not only the urban areas decline, but the trade also declines, because now there is no much surplus production taking place. So this period is featured with economic decline overall, according to R.S. Sharma. And one of the evidences that he gives for the decline of trade is the non-availability of coins. So he says that during the excavation, since we do not get much evidence of coins, that is why possibly this is a period when there was not much trade taking place, because non-availability of coins also indicates towards decline of trade, that is trade not taking place, and that is why the mode of exchange is not in evidence. So in a way, Professor Sharma is trying to explain this period of Indian feudalism as a period of decline, not only in terms of state, that is the power of the state declining because of the enhancement of the power of the feudal lords, but the economy also declines. Sharma also describes the period in terms of political decline, and as I told you that there were decentralization taking place, because he talks about the fragmentation of the political power that the kings used to hold. The feudal lords became very powerful, but then these feudal lords were also given the task of giving support to the king at the time of war with their soldiers. Now earlier on, when the system of land grant started, this is during this period, this is what the king actually expected from the feudal lords. They wanted the feudal lord to give military support, and in lieu of that, the feudal lord was actually given this area of land, and with this area of land, in this area of land, he was allowed to extract revenue from the peasantry, and with that revenue extraction he was able to maintain a particular contingent, and that contingent then helped the king in times of wars. But then at the same time, this kind of a system allowed the feudal lords to gradually become powerful. So if we talk about Sharma's argument, and the crux of it is that the feudal polity emerged from gradual breakdown of a centralized bureaucratic state system. It got decentralized, and this process gradually eroded the authority of the state, and this resulted in the vacant sense of sovereignty. So the essential characteristics of the state included both the vertical gradation, that is kings, you have the king, and then you have the feudal lords, the samantas, and then you have the sub-feudal lords. So there was a vertical gradation, and then you have the division of the sovereignty also. Then there is an emergence of separate category of semi-independent rulers, who are also referred to as samantas and the mahasamantas. Now the samantas, as I mentioned earlier, had diverse military obligations. The sub-infeudation that also took place at that during that period by the recipients of the land grants to get their land cultivated by others was a system which became very frequent, and this led to the growth of different strata of intermediaries. Thus this period is full of evidence of the landed aristocrats, tenants, sharecroppers and cultivators, and R.S. Sharma believes that since such kind of sub-infeudation is taking place, this is a kind of decentralization, that is, the state is moving towards decentralization, and as a result of this decentralization there is also decline of the economy taking place. Then Professor Sharma also indicates towards the reference of the terms like Vishti, which means the forced labor. And he says that forced labor was in the earlier period only a prerogative of the king or the state, but now in the early medieval period this now becomes common, and it is this forced labor right is also transferred to the grantees, the petty officials, and the village authorities. So he believes that like the classical feudalism of Europe, here also we get evidences of kind of a serfdom, though it's not in exact terms. It's a kind of a semi-serfdom which was in existence during the early medieval period. But then Professor Harbans Mukhia later on questioned this interpretation of the term Vishti, and Harbans Mukhia in fact went on to suggest that probably this Vishti was more of a begar, that is a kind of a labor which was very exceptional, and this was not a common feature for the period. So far as the conditions of the peasants are concerned, peasants experienced severe curtailment of their land rights. They were reduced to the position of tenants, and they were subjected to high taxation. They were deprived of all the rights of mobility, and they could no longer freely move from one place to another, according to Professor Sharma. But then later on, after Sharma's major hypothesis of Indian feudalism, Professor Harbans Mukhia questioned the very concept of Indian feudalism for this period. And then he wrote an article called "Was There Feudalism in Indian History?" He tried to compare the classical European feudalism with that of the Indian feudalism, which Professor Sharma explains. He is of the opinion that Indian feudalism could well have been a non-existent phenomena, and it was more of a make-believe construct for which there was no supporting evidence. He also points out that whereas in the European context feudalism emerged due to changes in the society, in the Indian context Professor Sharma has explained the emergence of feudalism in terms of state practices of making land grants. So Mukhia in a way questions the very existence of feudalism, even if we term it as Indian, and he says that there was no existence of even the basic feature of feudalism, that is serfdom. He also argues that the Indian peasantry was more of a free type, it was a free peasantry rather than serf. Then he also compares the Indian scenario with Europe, and he says that the Indian ecology was such that it did not require any kind of forced labor or a semi-serf or a serf, whereas in Europe it was required because the ecology demanded such thing. He says that in India you will find 10 months of sunshine, and this was a conducive scenario for Indian agriculture. Because of the intense heat followed by rainfall, the upper crust of the soil was made more fertile by this kind of a sunshine and frequent rainfall, and therefore it did not require deep digging or the intensive digging of the soil. So Professor Harbans Mukhia believes that it did not require such kind of digging, and therefore not much labor was needed. And whatever labor was needed, it was provided by the humped bull, the humped Indian bull, which is an exclusive feature of the Indian rural areas. And such kind of a humped bull was not available in Europe. The European bulls used to have a plain back, and in fact the Indian humped bull with a kind of hump on the back provided some kind of support for the plough to be drawn. And in the European scenario these bulls could not have been used, and therefore men were used for labor, and that is why serfdom prevailed. Further, Professor Mukesh suggests that land productivity was also much higher in medieval India, and most Indian land yielded 2 crops a year, and this was something unheard of in Europe. All these differences made it imperative that the forms of labor that we use in agriculture in India would follow a different pattern. So, Begar, according to him, which Professor Sharma tends to call it as Vishti or a forced labor, was not a very common phenomena, and probably Begar was a kind of unpaid or labor or tired labor. And Professor Mukhia suggests that the medieval Indian system was more of a free peasant economy rather than Indian or period of Indian feudalism. Recently, over the last 1 decade or so, Professor B.D. Chattopadhyay has come out with a new argument of change during this period. We, as you know, we all these arguments of different historians that we have been talking about, these arguments are all about change. All these historians talk about some kind of a change taking place in Indian history during this period. But within this change model, you have these different sub-models. That is, everyone is talking about a different kind of a change. Everyone is talking about a different and process of change taking shape during this period. So, Professor Chattopadhyay, B.D. Chattopadhyay, has come out with a different process of change, and his model is called the integrative polity model. Chattopadhyay, although agrees that there are many evidences of land grants during this period, but then he says that the very evidence of land grant does not actually suggest that this was a period dominated by Indian feudalism. So we may not be, it will not be correct to call this period as a period of Indian feudalism. It may not be correct to call this period a period of decline, because there was Indian feudalism in emergence, and he rather suggests that this was a period of proliferation of trade, proliferation of economy, and expansion of the state structure. He says that the pre-state polities gradually evolved into state polities, and it was this that resulted in the assimilation of local polities into larger state structures. He also explains that the establishment of larger polities took place in the nuclear areas, and then gradually these smaller states tried to enhance their power through the peasantization of the tribes. That is, the tribes of those areas were peasantized, they were drawn towards cultivation, and gradually these states, with the revenue coming in from those newly cultivated area, expanded their area, and then these states became larger states. So, as opposed to Sharma's argument, where we find a scenario from centralization to decentralization, Professor Chattopadhyay talks about a scenario where smaller states try to become larger states. So it's a kind of an integration taking place rather than disintegration. So as opposed to Professor Sharma, B.D. Chattopadhyay talks about the proliferation of state, proliferation of economy, and various other kind of prosperity. He also says that during this period we find improvement of agriculture techniques and the transformation of the tribal groups into peasant groups, and he terms it as the peasantization of tribes. This helped in the colonization of new areas and the emergence of new structure. In this explanation, he cites few examples like that of the Guhila states of Mewar. Then he cites examples of the Orissa, and the example of Orissa, where you find the Jagannath cult being used as a tool to expand the area of influence of the existing state. And the state then becomes, the smaller state increases its area, peasantizes the tribe, and then becomes a larger state. So it's a kind of integration that is taking place, and a new state structure is emerging beyond the core areas, that is the peripheries. So, Professor Chattopadhyay suggests that new political powers emerge through expansion into new regions, and the model developed by Chattopadhyay is therefore called the integrative polity model. It links the process of formation of state polities with economic and social processes, and he says that when we talk about the disintegration in terms of decline of central authority, decline of trade, or decline of urban centers, instead of that there is an integration taking place, and that integration leads to the emergence of new states. It leads to the emergence of trade, new trade taking place with newer areas, and there are new urban centers emerging. He in fact also suggests that we get evidence of many of new older urban areas as important urban centers, like Thaneshwar, like Kanyakubj, like Varanasi, and then there are new urban areas also coming into picture at the cost of the earlier declining areas. So he does not at all deny the decline of earlier urban centers, but at the same time he suggests that at the cost of these there were emergence of new urban centers. Then when he talks about the growth of trade and urban centers, he says that trade had flourished in several regions of India long before the feudalism proponents set a deadline for its revival around 1000 AD. And these new urban centers, as I told you, emerged at the cost of the old towns. And he cites example of cities like Gwalior, which he suggests that it emerged during this period only. Ranveer Chakrabarti has also brought forward ample evidences of a flourishing trade during this period. Then Chattopadhyay also suggests that there were many urban centers which developed in this region in the upper Ganges basin and the Malwa plateau. He indicates towards one of the terms that he finds in the inscriptions of called the Tatantapuram, and he says that this term is actually identified with Ahar near Bulandshahr, and this was a fully developed township of the upper Ganges basin. The other important urban centers that he cites example of are Siadani in Jhansi and Gopalgiri in Gwalior, where he says that the Shreshthis and the Sartavahas lived. These were basically merchant groups. Chattopadhyay also explains that the urban character of the settlements emerged from the use of the suffix pura. He says that this term called pura becomes very frequent during this period, and Chattopadhyay then suggests that probably this period was a period of third urbanization. As you must have heard of the first and the second urbanization during the ancient period, first urbanization being that of the Harappan urbanization, the second urbanization after the invention of the iron and the use of iron tools. Chattopadhyay says that this is probably a period when the third urbanization takes place. There are major urban centers coming into pictures. So the new urban centers that emerges are basically because of the proliferation of trade and proliferation of the economy. Then he also talks about the construction of new architectures which becomes very frequent during this period, and probably he suggests that it is largely because of the prosperity of the economy that new temple construction are taking place during this period. Many traders, many local landlords gave grants to these temples for the construction of the temples, and as a result of this you find the construction of various temples not only in central India but also in various other parts of India. Then John S. Tail wrote a book called Living Without Silver, and in that book he talks about uh, of a new kind of financial proliferation during this period. He says that the very evidence of the non-availability of coins does not indicate towards disintegration of economy, and he says that we do not get any evidence other than this as indicating towards financial crisis. He says that rather this was a period of increasing demand of coins, and as a result of it we find the alloyed coins, that is the coins mixed kind of a coins mixed with various metals were in existence. And when there was no silver and gold available, people even used cowries as means of exchange. Then we also get evidence during this period of a term called hundika. Hundika was a bill of exchange that was used during this period, and we get frequent references to such terms in the inscriptional records. These hundikas are basically a kind of guarantee which the trader used to write on a piece of leaf that he guarantees to pay this much amount, and he was not supposed to carry the money with it, the coins or the whatever currency was in existence. He did not carry it with himself, and then he used to give a guarantee of payment in his own area of living. So it's a kind of bill of exchange which was very common during this period. This is what the revisionist group of historians suggest, and this also suggests towards the proliferation of trade during this period. Then we also get evidence of trade relation with the Arab world during this period, and we many historians believe that during this period we start getting reference to the trade with Arab, and even during the 9th century, and many traders from the Arabian world came to India to trade in various luxury items. We also get evidence of the trading relation with Southeast Asia and China during this period, and probably Professor V.K. Jain suggests that this trade actually became very frequent only after 1000 AD. In a way, by suggesting this, that trade revived after 1000 AD, Professor V.K. Jain was substantiating Sharma's argument. He was actually trying to suggest that, as Sharma had written in his book Indian Feudalism, that the trade could revive after 1000 AD, but despite that, the system of land grant or the system of Indian feudalism was not challenged, it was not disturbed. So when V.K. Jain suggests that the trade proliferated even after 1000 AD, it did not disturb the earlier existing land grant system, and this has been even talked about by Professor D.N. Jha also. But later day historians suggested that this kind of an emergence of trade or revival of trade which Professor V.K. Jain talks about after 1000 AD was actually done earlier. That is, the trade revived even during the earlier period. That is, from the 8th 9th century only the trade had revived. The trade was very much in existence, and we get a lot of evidence of trading relations with China, with Southeast Asia, even for the 9th century AD. So the inscriptions, that is why, mention such kind of tall houses like Shulka Mandapikas, which indicates that the commerce during this period prospered, and it was an important source of income for the state. So as part of conclusion, we may suggest that the stereotypical construct of Indian feudalism has been subjected to a radical appraisal over the recent years, many new historians have started questioning the very idea of Indian feudalism. The integrative polity model has gained much popularity in recent years, and because it tries to accommodate the long-term dynamics of change in the Indian history, and it indicates towards a prosperous period in terms of economy. When we talk about proliferation of trade or even revival of trade, an important thing to understand is that this revival of trade or an urban center is not possible without the surplus production taking place. Now, if we look at the Professor Sharma's argument, we will find that when he talks about the system of land grants, when he talks about the feudal system, when he talks about the sub-infeudation, he actually means that while explaining all these processes, he also talks about the self-sufficient village economy. So he suggests that probably there was not much production going outside a village area, and everything was being consumed in the village system itself, and that is why the trade declined. But the first thing that the revisionist question was the very idea of the self-sufficient village system itself, because when we talk about the self-sufficient village system, it is not possible when there are new areas being brought into cultivation. When we talk about the new areas, when we explain this period in terms of peasantization of tribes, that is the new tribal areas being promoted into peasant economy, it's not possible that the production will not enhance. So once we suggest that the new areas are brought into cultivation, once we suggest that the tribes are brought into this idea of the tribes are brought into this system of cultivation, because the tribes were traditionally hunters gatherers. So once they are brought into the system of cultivation, they are bound to wait for the cultivation to grow, and then they cultivate and they find that they are getting much profit than the earlier system. So then the tribes are encouraged to grow more crops, and in a way this leads to more and more production. So this surplus production, the system of surplus production itself, leads to a situation when trade will automatically flourish. So once what Chattopadhyay and various other historians of this group try to explain is that when they first of all challenge Sharma's very idea of the emergence of feudalism in the core area, and then they say that what happens to the peripheries. So they say that in the peripheries there are many new developments taking place, and when these new developments take place, new irrigation facilities are provided in these peripheries, new cultivation, new land area is brought into cultivation, surplus is bound to take place, and when surplus takes place, there has to be more new urban areas coming up, and then more trade too is bound to be flourishing. So this period is not at all a period of stagnation, is not a period of decline, rather this is a period which needs more attention. We need to dig out more details, and the future is that possibly the historians of the future will come out with more evidences, since this period is not full of written records. They may dig out more sources from the inscriptional records, and then come out with new ideas of early medieval Indian history. Thank you so much.
So, well, you talked about the sufficient village economy, and the period was prosperous, and that is also evident from the wealth accumulated in the mandir, temples, and the inviters come for that. So what we conclude from this, what was the driving force of that time, driving motive of economic activities?
Very interesting question. In fact, since it was Delhi Sultanate, which is going to be the part of our second lecture series, we did not discuss much about that. But you've raised a very interesting question, that why is it that the Turks were invading those areas? And let me tell you that, Mahmud of Ghazni, he invaded mostly the temples. He made almost 17 raids into India, and all these raids were concentrated around the temples. One of the temples that is very famous which he raided was that of Somnath. And Somnath is basically located in Veraval, Gujarat, that is the coastal area. It was also a trading center. It is here from where the Arabian horses were imported and then sent to various other parts. So this was a very important trading center. Probably the traders of that region gave a lot of grant to this temple in Somnath. So it is because of this prosperity which Mahmud of Ghazni must have heard of, and that is why he invaded the temple and looted the temple. So basically, all these developments taking place also indicate towards some kind of prosperity of the region. We cannot discuss or describe this period only in terms of decline. There was certainly a period this was certainly a period when there are new developments taking place, and one of the driving force that you talk about is the peasantization of the new areas.
Okay.
This is a period when new areas are brought into cultivation, and when new areas are brought into cultivation, that is, new people are drawn into this system of cultivation, agriculture, the production has to increase. Right. And when production increases, the economy will prosper. So this is a period of prosperity, and this is one of the driving forces.
And but we also can say that the land grant was given only those kind of lands which were not cultivated, and which were made cultivation by the grant those peoples.
Mm-hmm.
So. So in this way we come to one like this Padmanabha Mandir, recent Padmanabha Mandir recently come. It is repository of huge wealth. So those days temple were also repository of huge wealth. So do we find the instances of some places which were very rich and some are like very poor, people are dying of hunger, like in present situation, some of the districts of Orissa, still people are facing difficulties, but Delhi, Mumbai, other metros are prospering. So is such kind of situation was then or not?
This period, why this period is very rich in terms of debate and discussion, because this period lacks in terms of sources. Okay. There are not well recorded and systemized sources available for this period like we find for the later period. For the later period you will get a lot of systematic descriptions. Delhi Sultanate rulers came and they
recorded the events.
They sponsored the historians, and these historians used to record the events
of
the court. So they were largely court historians, but this kind of systematic record is not available for the earlier period. We do not get much evidence of these records for the earlier period, and just because we do not have much evidence of such records, the historians have to depend a lot on the inscriptions. Okay. And that is why the inscriptions become so important for this period. But one of the problems with inscriptional records is that inscriptions are basically what? These inscriptions are largely the records of the grants given, or these are the records of the grants given to the temples, and that is why it only mentions about the richer section of the society, that is either the traders or the landlords. So we do not get a holistic picture for this period only on the basis of the inscriptional records. It's very difficult to dig out direct evidence of such kind of economic situation of the two classes of the society, that is economically prosperous and economically weaker. So it's very difficult to suggest for this period as on date.
What was the relation among the people involved in different economic activities that time?
As I told you, I will cite one example, as I mentioned in my lecture, an example of the Jagannath cult. Professor Harman Kulke has worked a lot on this Jagannath cult, which we hear of today. Even the Jagannath Yatra is taken out in Odisha every year. This Jagannath cult was originally a tribal cult, and gradually, the local ruler of that area integrated the culture of the tribes, that is the cult, the cult that was being which was popular during this period, in order to include those tribes into his own territory. He adopted the tribal cult of those tribes, that is the Jagannath cult, the ruler, and then gradually he Hinduized the cult. But at the same time, he was able to win over the faith of those tribes. So at the same time, not only he did adopt the cult, he also peasantized the area, that is the tribe. He asked the tribes to do cultivation. So this was a long run process. This is a period when tribes are peasantized and their cult is integrated into the mainstream. So the king, you must have heard of, in modern times, you will find many political leaders going on a stage in a particular region, wearing the dress of the particular state or a tribe. What is the meaning behind it? Basically, they try to fit themselves into those population and culture.
Yeah.
They are trying to win over the people. Probably during this period, the kings of that period also tried to integrate those culture of the tribes, tried to integrate those tribal people, and this indicates towards more kind of integration during this period, and probably it leads us to a situation when the state is at least trying to include even the tribal people into the mainstream. So an attempt is being made.
Okay. So, well, friend, today you came to know about the various economic activity, what were their relation, and how the economy evolved and people were prosperous. And tomorrow we will talk about the Delhi Sultanate and others economic and other regional chhatraps also, which were side by side.
More of Delhi Sultanate and the Mughals.
And Mughals. So we'll talk about it in tomorrow lecture, economic status and economic activity in Sultanate period and Mughal periods. So today I thank all of you for watching the lecture. On your behalf, I thank Dr. Vipul Singh for giving such an insightful lecture on medieval Indian economy. Thank you very much.